All right, good morning, everyone, or afternoon, wherever you are. This is my presentation, my seminar on glaciers and why they are important to a dynamic Earth. I'm going to be using the term dynamic a lot in this presentation, and that's just meant to describe constant activity in more than one aspect. So you can look at it as the Earth itself, where there's a ton of weather and there's a ton of cultures happening all at once. So glaciers sort of represent this because they affect the past, present, and the future. And they have affected the past that we'll see with how they build the landscapes that we see today. They affect the present in our current understanding of science, and they show us the future, which is evident through their response to climate change. This is my thesis then. By understanding the power of glaciers, the importance of glaciers, and the significance of glaciers, it is evident that these massive bodies are not only rock and ice, but a process that reveals details of the past, present, and future. What exactly is a glacier then? It is a big, heavy sheet of ice that moves downhill, and it forms when ice and snow compress and accumulate over hundreds of years. Glaciers are a huge source of freshwater, making up 75% of the Earth's freshwater, although they only cover 10% of the Earth, which is in the north, south, and the third pole, which is a little nickname for the Himalayan region. They're found in other places too. It's mostly high altitude and cold places. What glaciers do to shape the Earth then is they do this through the process of deposition and through erosion. So deposition is when it's going to pick up sediments and it's going to drop them somewhere else. A good example of this is a glacial erratic, which is a boulder that's found in the middle of nowhere, but it got there because it was transported by a glacier. Here's a diagram of some of the landscape effects that the glacier carves out. So there's these deep depressions called cirques, for example. And an analogy that I like to use for this is if you're pushing a rock through sand, it's a lot heavier and it's going to displace that sand. How do these then affect people? So, like I said, they are a lot of fresh water. And so here's the third pole. Here's an example of the third pole. And all that meltwater from the glaciers in the Himalayan region is going to fill these rivers, which are surrounded by areas of a large population. So a lot of people are going to get their drinking water from those. They also help with agriculture. So the example that I used in my research paper was in Switzerland, where they redirect the water from the mountains into the crops. And they also can be used for hydroelectric dams because they're in rivers. So my third point is about the cultures and the understanding surrounding glaciers. So because glaciers are found all over the world, they are surrounded by a whole bunch of different cultures. So for the Athabascan people in northwestern Canada and southeastern Alaska, it's been said that glaciers have long provided travel routes that enabled human connections between coast and interior, and they are characterized by sentience. They listen, pay attention, and respond to human behavior, especially to indiscretion. So here is an example of how Indigenous knowledge about glaciers has impacted their community. So this is a remote region called Gilgit-Baltistan in Pakistan. And what they do there, because it's so dry and remote, they don't have a lot of access to fresh water. They actually take blocks of ice from male and female glaciers and combine them together in a cold environment so that when they melt, it provides a lot of fresh water for the community. So they affect the present because they show our diverse understanding of science. There's rational knowledge, which we usually use in Western science, which is the use of variables. So if this variable lines up with this variable, then this must be true. Whereas empirical knowledge, which we're seeing as traditional ecological knowledge, is passed down from generation to generation. So the field of glaciology is going to have to consist of both. You have to listen to what native groups have to say, as well as measuring your variables to learn about glaciers. Glaciers and climate change. This is a big one because this is why people are so interested in glaciers nowadays. So this is in Glacier National Park, and they have been measuring how the climate is affecting the glaciers. And someone actually wrote in their discussion post about how Glacier National Park is losing a lot of their glaciers, and that is because of climate change. So the reason why glaciers retreat, which is their terminus moves away, is because they are decreasing in surface area. So that is due to less snow falling or precipitation falling as snow to increase the surface area. And the reason why glaciers are great indicators of climate change is because they are made of ice and snow. Here are two glaciers depicted, here are two diagrams depicting how the melt of glaciers affects the environment. So here is Arctic sea ice extent, and you can see this is the gray. It shows that there was more area covered by glaciers in the past than what there is now. And this is due to melting of the ice, which we see a clear correlation between global temperatures, the increase in global temperatures, and the increase of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. Who exactly is this affecting, though? So it affects all of us, clearly. With changing weather, we're going to have to change our habits. But this project, which I view as a credible source, was organized by two poets, one from Greenland and one from the Marshall Islands, to show how climate change, how the rising sea levels are changing their day-to-day life.
Just to imagine turning ourselves to stone.
Can you see a glacier's grown the weight of the world's heat? I wait for you, here on the land of my ancestors, heart heavy with a continuous thirst for solutions. As I watch this land change while the world remains silent.
So that was the little blurb that I chose to include in my research paper because clearly their planet is changing with these glaciers melting, and it is a direct effect. It's not these secondary effects that we're going to have to consider after, but it is really affecting people right now. So what can we do about it? We need to stop making the planet so hot. And the reason why the planet is getting so hot is because of the greenhouse effect. So that is when CO2 acts as a blanket surrounding the planet that won't let heat escape. And it's even worse because when the heat is going to melt sea ice, which is white, which reflects heat back into space. So now we don't even have heat going back into space. And we can reduce these emissions through clean energy and through less destruction of natural resources, specifically forests, because they absorb so much CO2. So this was examined in the Netflix documentary Our Planet with the World Wildlife Fund and David Attenborough. And here is how they talk about clean energy.
Renewables will drive down the cost of electricity, create millions of jobs, and stimulate our economies. Electric vehicles will transform the way we travel and make our streets safer and quieter. And we will eliminate air pollution, currently the greatest environmental threat to human health, so we will even live longer. Imagine stepping out onto the street.
So this documentary has actually been viewed quite a bit. And it's really important that we're getting that message out there. In conclusion, I really like glaciers. I think they're beautiful because of their dynamic nature. They explain why the landscape is the way it is and what will happen to it. As well, they explain why it is important to incorporate knowledge from Indigenous communities, which is really interesting to me because I'm really into social justice. And glaciers, they're these massive processes that contain so much possibility. They have fresh water and they serve so many communities. And they're these really important processes that we need to respect. So to me, they represent the beauty on Earth in its dynamic, all-encompassing, and complex nature. And we really have to show our love and appreciation for these natural processes in order to save the planet from climate change. And I'm running out of time. Here are my references for all the images that I used here. And I hope you all have a really nice day. And that